In my observation of the record, the issue is not the absence of evidence, it is the separation of it. Because when we turn to the original documents, they do not describe Europe the way we imagine it today. Take Benjamin Franklin. Writing in 1751, he states that the number of purely white people in the world is very small, and then he applies the term swarthy to populations across Europe, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Spaniards, not assumed but separated. Now compare that to court records, where figures are described as very black, black complexion, tall, black, swarthy man, recorded for identification, not symbolism, not exaggeration, which means these are observations. And when independent records use the same language, they do not create confusion, they create a pattern, and patterns require explanation. So the question is not presence, it is continuity, because for generations, the presence of darker populations in Europe has been explained as something introduced, something external, often tied to a specific moment, the year 711. But when we step away from that framework and return to the records themselves, a different question begins to emerge. Not whether populations moved, but whether the descriptions associated with them already existed within Europe long before that moment. In my observation of the record, the description does not appear once. It appears across courts, across countries, across generations. The wording shifts, but the pattern does not. We begin in the early 17th century at the level of the court, where description was not casual but deliberate, recorded, preserved, repeated. In England, records describing Queen Elizabeth I note a swarthy complexion, not vague, not implied, but written, and more importantly, linked to lineage, mother to daughter, trait to inheritance. Now we move to Central Europe, to the dynastic records of the Holy Roman Empire. In text describing the Austrian ruling house, the Habsburg line, the same descriptor appears again, swarthy complexion, attached not to an individual but to a family, a ruling family, which is critical, because at this level, the description is not incidental, it is identifying. Now before we go further, the language itself must be fixed, because if the words are misunderstood, the record will be misread. In 1751, Benjamin Franklin writes that the number of purely white people in the world is very small, and then he applies the term swarthy to populations across Europe, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Russians, the Swedes, grouped together under one descriptor. Now fast forward to 1828, Noah Webster defines the term directly: swarthy, dark, dusky, tawny, often approaching black. So the meaning is not ambiguous. It is established, not by modern interpretation, but by the language of the time, which means when the word appears in the record, it carries weight. By the mid-17th century, the language moves from record to identity. In England, Charles II is known publicly as the Black Boy, not privately, not symbolically, but openly recognized, described as swarthy, with black hair. Now we move to France. Louis XIV, described in life as having a brown complexion, and when his tomb is later opened, observers record the condition of the remains, noting a darkened appearance in contrast to later portraits. And then we encounter a record that does something different. It does not simply describe, it compares. In 1648, a letter recorded in the calendar of state papers documents an incident at Sandwich. An individual, claiming to be the prince, is examined, and in that examination, two descriptions are placed side by side. The man in question is described as having a fair complexion, flaxen hair, and based on that, he is identified as an imposter because the real prince is recorded differently, described as of a black complexion with very black hair. Now let's pause there. This is not a general observation. This is a point of distinction, a method of identification. The difference between real and false resting on complexion, which raises a question that cannot be ignored. If the authentic figure is defined by a darker description, why do later portrayals move in the opposite direction? Because in this record, the contrast is explicit, not interpreted, not implied, but written as the basis for recognition. And once again, the pattern does not shift, it reinforces, because now the descriptor is not only observed, it is used to confirm identity, used to reject an imposter, which means it was understood, recognized, expected. And then the description leaves the court and enters the system. In 1733, John Macky records James Francis Edward Stuart as a tall, lean black man, not poetic, not symbolic, but written for identification. Now we move further into military records, muster rolls, where misidentification had consequences, and in those records we find the same language again. Men described as dark, brown, swarthy. One entry noted as dark and swarthy with a flat nose. This is not artistic language, this is administrative detail. And then Scotland, Martin, describing the inhabitants of Jura as generally black of complexion, not exceptional, not rare, but general, which brings us to a point of pressure. If the same descriptors appear in courts, in intelligence records, in military rolls, and in population studies, what exactly is being recorded? In my observation of the military record, we move from description to documentation. Mid-18th century, Virginia, muster rolls, compiled not from memory, but face to face. Men standing before officers, their details recorded, height, trade, origin, and complexion. One entry, an Englishman, listed simply as dark, another brown, and then a third, swarthy, not symbolic, not interpretive, but written as part of identification, which is critical, because in this context, precision mattered. These were soldiers, men whose identity had to be clear, which means these descriptors were not unusual, they were expected. And when men from England and Scotland are recorded this way, within official military documents, the pattern does not weaken, it strengthens. Now we move into the ethnological record, where description becomes lineage. In the study of early Scotland, we encounter a recurring term, dub, meaning black, attached to one of the most powerful families, the Douglases. The name itself translated as black or dark, not metaphor, not title, but identification. And in the record, this is not isolated. We find references to black Danes, black Vikings, black foreigners, distinguished not by nationality, but by complexion, set apart from others described as fair, which introduces a critical point. These are not external labels applied later, they are distinctions made within the record itself, between populations existing in the same space, at the same time, which again reinforces the pattern we have already seen. Then, we return to the heraldic system, but now, with greater clarity. In the records of the English gentry, we find repeated use of a specific image, the Moor's head, described using the term sable, meaning black, not occasionally, but across multiple families, Moor, Moyle, Crispy, lineages recorded, preserved, recognized. And when these same surnames appear later in colonial records, described again as swarthy or dark, the connection becomes difficult to ignore, because now the descriptor is not appearing randomly, it is appearing across systems, heraldry, lineage, population records, which suggests continuity, not coincidence. And then we move into the newspapers, runaway advertisements, printed for identification. Now look closely at the language. This is not interpretation, this is what is written. Dark complexion, swarthy, an Englishman, Irish. These are not distant populations, these are individuals identified by origin and described by complexion. And the purpose of this description was accuracy, because a mistaken description meant the wrong person. So the question becomes, when these words appear in real-time identification, how were they understood by the people reading them then? In my observation of the record, the evidence does not argue, it accumulates across texts, across regions, across time, and when viewed together, it presents a pattern that does not always align with the simplified version we are familiar with today. So the question is not whether these descriptions exist. They do. The question is why they are so rarely shown alongside the images we recognize, and what happens when the written record and the visual narrative no longer match. Because once you begin to read the record directly, You are no longer relying on interpretation, you are observing for yourself. And to everyone who has been following this work, those who have subscribed, those who have been engaging in the comments, and especially those supporting through Substack, your support makes it possible to continue this kind of research. It allows the time to go back to the documents, to verify, and to present the record carefully. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can join the Substack. That's where I provide the source material in full, PDFs, document collections, and extended breakdowns, so you can review the records directly. The goal is not just to present information, but to make the sources accessible.